Senator John McCain suggested that President Obama has gotten off to a terrible start with the way that he crafted the stimulus bill, basically left out all of the Republican ideas. McCain didn't quite come out and say it, but suggested that he might have done a better job had he been president. And I'm wondering, what do you think of the job that President Obama did on this? And is he, in fact, does he, in fact, have the experience necessary to be a good president, reach across party lines, and craft a bipartisan bill?
Well, first of all, he has reached across, and it takes two to tango. I find it amazing that the Republicans, who doubled the debt of the country in 8 years and produced no new jobs doing it, gave us an economic record that was totally bereft of any productive result, are now criticizing him for spending money. You know, I'm a fiscal conservative. I balanced the budget. I ran surpluses. If I were in his position today, I'd be doing what he's doing. Why? Because the problem with the economy is the housing decline led to the general decline in values. Assets are going down. This stimulus is our bridge over troubled waters till the bank reforms kicked in. He did the right thing. He did everything he could to get Republican support. He took some of their tax-cutting ideas. But if you look at this bill, it is designed to do three things, and it does all three. It puts money in the hands of people who need money to survive. Unemployment benefits, food stamp benefits, tax cuts. Second thing it does is to give money to state and local governments so they don't have to lay 1 million people off or raise taxes. Either one would be bad for the economy. The third thing it does is create new jobs. And I think given the Congress he had and the environment and the speed with which they had to move, I think he did a fine job with this.
So what's your take then on what Senator McCain said, that he's off to a terrible start?
Well, I just disagree with him, but we have a different economic philosophy. For example, there's 100 economic studies which show that you get a better return in terms of economic growth on extending unemployment benefits or investing money in energy conservation jobs to improve buildings than you do giving people in my income group a tax cut. But it doesn't stop them. Those guys are on automatic. They have a, you know, you punch a button and they give you the answer they give you. I think that there are a lot of tax cuts in that bill for middle-class families, for lower-income families. There's a $7,500 tax credit that will kick in when these plug-in electric vehicles go on the market, which could help us to become the world's leader in that and secure us jobs for a decade or more.
Do you really think the president can change Washington, can bring the type of change to Washington that he campaigned on? He's already up against a wall against the Republicans in Congress, not quite as big a wall as you found yourself up against in 1993, but he does seem to be having some difficulty. Do you think he really can bring change to Washington?
Here's what I think will happen. I think that as we go along, if the American people stick with him and if he begins to have good results, then I think more and more Republicans will cooperate with him because they will see that he's right, or because he carried their states, or for any number of reasons.
How long do you think he has?
Well, I think that first his next big challenge is to come forward with the details of how we're going to rewrite as many home mortgages as we can, how are we going to take some of these bad assets off the bank's books so they can get cleaned up and they can loan money, and what conditions will we give more money to banks for? That is, they're going to have to loan money from now on. That's what Secretary Geithner's working on. Those three things make a lot of sense. That's our long-term answer. The stimulus is our bridge over troubled water, I'll say again. So when he does that, as it starts to work and people see America start moving again, then I think you'll see people open up and we'll see a more bipartisan spirit develop.
But how much time do you think he has? 100 days, 6 months, a year, 2 years?
I think that first he's got the public, I believe, will support him at least for a year in trying to work these things out. And he's been very straightforward in saying it might take as much as 2 years for the economy to really get in gear again. My instinct is it'll happen a little quicker than that. But keep in mind, before he ever took office, $30 trillion had disappeared. That's more than twice America's annual gross national product.
Mr. President, in terms of the overall economic downturn, Time magazine had an article out this week in which it named 25 of the people most responsible for the economic downturn, and you were there. They had a picture of you in what looked like a police lineup. They had a little button where you could vote who's the most responsible. They pointed to your signing of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, Commodities Future Modernization Act. Wondering what you think about that.
I think that the only thing that our administration did or didn't do that we should have done is to try to set in motion some more formal regulation of the derivatives market. They're wrong in saying that the elimination of the Glass-Steagall division between banks and investment banks contributed to this. Investment banks were already doing an investment business, and investment companies were already in the banking business. The bill I signed actually at least put some standards there. And if you look at the evidence of the banks that have gotten in trouble, the ones that were most directly involved in a diversified portfolio tended to do better.
Right. So
some of the conservatives said that I was responsible because I enforced the Community Reinvestment Act, and they said that's what made all these subprime mortgages be issued. That's also false. The community banks, the people that loan their money in the community instead of buying these esoteric securities, they're doing quite well.
What kind of an impact is that having on the global initiative and your ability to raise the type of funds and generate the type of interest in overseas projects and projects here at home, for that matter, that you could before?
First, let me say, when it comes to the students, which we do separately, they normally do low-cost, high-labor impact projects. So far, it's had no impact except to increase the interest and the sense of obligation they have to do more to help people in the United States as well as around the world. We typically might have had, in a normal time, 2/3 of the commitments to Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and 1/3 in America. This year, it's more like 50-50, because these young people know that they need to do more work at home. But there's been more interest here. We probably are 50% higher than last year in the commitments. Last year we had 700 commitments when we left here. This year we're at about almost 1,100. With the larger Clinton Global Initiative we have in New York, last year, which occurred after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and therefore when the market was going down and values were dropping, what I noticed was that in the direct donations, we were holding firm, but in the private investment part of the global initiative, which was mostly in energy, that dropped off markedly last year. But we still had $8 billion in commitments. Now, of course, the test will be how we do this year, because now we've had a year of a down stock market and a year of commodities prices dropping.
Is it changing your fundraising structure? Are you having to go from some of those big dollar donations you were getting from overseas down to more of a grassroots type of campaign, similar to what President Obama did during his campaign?
Yes. I think all of us will have to. And not just overseas, but even some of our big dollar commitments in America. I noticed, I'm in Harlem, and Harlem is the home of the Harlem Children's Zone, and it's probably the most innovative urban development program in the country for families and children. Most of their money came from Wall Street, so they've got to get smaller donations. I already had a lot of small donors. I have over 200,000 donors of $100 or less. But most of the rest of the money from my projects came from people who gave $500,000 or more. So what I am doing is spending the first 6 months of this year restructuring our foundation, putting out the word about what we do, and asking people who can give to give more modest amounts of money and maybe make multi-year commitments. But I feel the same way about my foundation and all of this movement I'm involved in that I do about America. This is a tough time, but when we get through this, we'll be on sounder ground. We'll have more broadly shared responsibilities and more broadly shared prosperity.
Your wife is on a big trip over to the Far East. She's talking with the leaders of China. She's going to be taking on the North Korea issue. There's been some talk in the last week that with the appointment of all of these high-profile envoys like Richard Holbrooke to South Asia, George Mitchell to the Middle East, Dennis Ross in the same area, Vice President Joe Biden out there talking about foreign policy, that maybe she might get a little bit elbowed out here when it comes to the big projects. Are you concerned about that? Do you talk to her about that?
No, I'm not concerned about it. And these envoys were her idea, both the idea of the envoys and the people who were selected. And she thinks that Joe Biden has got one of the best foreign policy minds and certainly some of the most important foreign policy experience we've had. Let me remind you, when I was president, Al Gore had special relationships with both Russia and South Africa. Mm-hmm. And it didn't undermine the authority of either Warren Christopher, Madeleine Albright as Secretary of State. The reason they're doing this, and the reason the president agreed to support it and came to the State Department to support the announcements of Holbrooke and Mitchell, is that they all want to get off to a fast start, and you got to do a lot of things at once. And it's inconceivable that she could devote the time and detailed attention right now to having a diplomatic strategy for Afghanistan and Pakistan that exactly parallels the military strategy that General Petraeus is doing, or figures out how to start the Middle East peace negotiations again and what the timetable is, and do all this other stuff. So as long as they're working on a team and nobody's playing sharp elbows, and this is a team, these guys have got a team concept. The President's made it clear he wants everybody to be on the team. They all report into her as well as to him. They're all working together, and I'm very impressed by that. I think that she made a judgment that we needed, in the country's interest, to do everything at once, and I think she's right.
Of course, bilateral relations between the United States and China, big focus of your administration. Did you talk to her at all about this trip before she embarked?
Sure I did. I'm just like she consulted with a lot of people. We talked about it. I told her what my take on the Chinese is, especially in light of the fact that I work there now in AIDS. I have a big AIDS project there, and I know how they think economically, and I think she'll do quite well there. And I think she made a really good decision. Obviously, she had to go to Japan and South Korea, but going to Indonesia, the world's biggest Muslim country, sends a loud signal, because Indonesia has a part of it, Bali, which is predominantly Hindu, which has been the subject of terrorist attacks. So it's a good deal. I mean, the whole thing, it's the right place to start.
A couple of real quick questions, if I could. What president do you think you're most like?
Well, personally, I'm not sure. One guy wrote a book saying that I was most like Thomas Jefferson, but the times in which I governed were most like Theodore Roosevelt's. Mm-hmm. And we had, the results I received were similar. He had enormous success. The country was better off when he quit than when he started, but several of the things he recommended were not actually done until his cousin Franklin Roosevelt became president, more than 20 years later. I think that a lot of the things that I recommended in terms of health care reform will come to fruition now that we have a more modern Democratic Congress and a new Democrat Congress and the Obama administration there. I'll be surprised they don't get health care reform and some of the other things I recommended. I'm excited about it.
One other quick question. U.S. News & World Report this week commissioned a poll, surveyed a bunch of women in America, asking what role you should take on with your wife as Secretary of State. 37%, the greatest number of women said house husband. Wondering what you think about that.
Well, it's funny. I told her when she left that I wished now that I was an ordinary citizen.